Good day, grade 11 learners. Welcome to today's grade 11 life science lesson. My name is Shabnam Sukhnandan. This lesson is brought to you by the Sci-Bono Discovery Center in collaboration with the Gauteng Department of Education. So today, learners, we're going to be dealing with revision questions on homeostasis. And you should know this is very, very important, as the homeostasis part of grade 11 work is also tested in grade 12. So let us now go through. So first of all, learners, we're going to look at some terminology that you need to know regarding homeostasis. Now, the word homeostasis simply means, the word stasis means stationary or stable or constant, and homeo means the internal environment. Now, what do we mean by the internal environment? We mean our body cells and the blood and the tissue fluid. So that is our internal environment, whereas around us, that is the external environment. So we need to ensure that certain factors are kept constant in the blood, in the cells, and the fluid around the cells, called tissue fluid. So now let us look at it. Homeostasis, what is the meaning? And you need to know this definition for at least 2 marks. So homeostasis means to maintain a stable or constant internal environment within the blood, body cells, and tissue fluid regarding temperature and chemical balances, irrespective of the changes in the external environment, which means that whether it's very hot outside or very cold outside, our body temperature on the inside of our cells and blood must always be what? 37.5 degrees Celsius. Our chemical balance, such as glucose, water, salt, thyroxine, all those factors must also be kept constant in our blood. All right, irrespective of the changes outside. So it's the maintenance of a constant internal environment regarding chemicals and regarding temperature, irrespective of the external environment. Now we speak about a negative feedback mechanism. What does this mean, learners? You learned in maths that there's a positive and a negative is equal to a negative. Positive, we mean like there's an increase, and a decrease will give you a decrease, or a decrease and an increase will give you a decrease. So this is what we mean. When certain factors in the body is too high, like your temperature is too high, then there must be some kind of a mechanism that must decrease that temperature so it comes back to normal. When your temperature is too low, then there must be another factor that must increase the temperature so it comes back to normal. So we call this a negative feedback mechanism, right? So what is a negative feedback mechanism? It's mechanisms in the human body that detect changes or imbalances. It's a mechanism that can see there's a change or an imbalance in the human body, right, in the internally, and then it will do something to restore homeostasis, to bring it back to constant, to bring it back to be stable. So mechanisms in the human body that detect changes or imbalances in the internal conditions, that is your internal environment, and then they will restore homeostasis, maintain it. That is called a negative feedback mechanism. Now we're going to look at one of the chemicals in the body that must be kept constant. It must always be at around 6 to 7 milligrams in the blood, and that is glucose. Learners, this is a very important molecule, glucose. Remember that the glucose, what we spoke about it, that glucose is made up of C6H12O6, ne? And what does glucose always give you? Remember that glucose is synthesized or made by plants during photosynthesis. So how do they make the glucose? They use the carbon dioxide from the air, they use the water from the soil, together with the light from the sun, which is locked in this glucose molecule. So glucose is basically there to give us energy. And what are the two energies that glucose gives us is ATP energy and heat energy. You remember you did this year during cellular respiration. Now you need to apply that knowledge of glucose. What does it really do? So let us look at now glucose, which is a sugar. And remember in grade 10, you did that glucose is a monosaccharide. It's the simplest sugar. So it can't be stored. It's always used. As long as it's simplified, it's going to be used by the cell. That is glucose. And where does it come from? Your bread that you eat, the mealy meal that you eat, right? Your sweets, your cool drinks, your candies, your crisp. All that starch is broken down to glucose. That's a simple sugar. Now, this sugar must never be too high in the blood, and it must never be too low in the blood. Okay, so let us see the role. Understand that glucose gives us energy. Okay, we don't say sugar because sugar is what you use in the tea. We always say glucose gives us energy because it's the simplest sugar, simplest form of a sugar. So the more you exercise, the more energy you need. So if you are going to exercise, your muscle cells will need more energy. So what does it implicate? It implicates, therefore, more glucose is going to be broken down because glucose has energy that is locked and stored inside. All that light energy of the sun that is trapped during photosynthesis to make the glucose, that energy of the sun is trapped in the glucose. So when the enzymes in the mitochondria break down the glucose during respiration, it's going to give you energy. So let's see again. The more you exercise, so the more active you become, the more energy you need. It makes sense. Therefore, more glucose will be broken down because glucose contains energy. And more CO2 will be released. As I said, to make glucose, we need what? CO2 plus water plus light energy. So it's going to make the glucose. Now, when you're going to break down glucose, all that CO2 is going to be released again into the air via the nostrils. So more carbon dioxide will be released as cellular respiration in the mitochondria will increase, demanding more oxygen and more heat, and ATP energy will be released for the muscles to do work. So let us look at this little sketch over here. Here's your glucose molecule, and you can see that the glucose undergoes cellular respiration where? In your organelle called the mitochondria. Learners, this is tested right up to metric level. The mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell. And what does it use? It uses glucose, okay? It uses glucose, right? And it uses oxygen by a process called cellular respiration. And what does it give you? CO2, water, ATP energy to do work, and it also releases what? You also need oxygen as well. Can you see? So glucose is taken in, and also oxygen is used, and then it releases what? Carbon dioxide, water, and ATP. So this is the role of glucose, that it is broken down during cellular respiration to give you energy, and that the more active you become, the more energy you'll use, the more glucose you'll use. More glucose will be broken down, and it's going to release more CO2. Now, you know CO2 cannot stay in the body, right? So what do we need glucose for? You can see this person is now trying to push this tire, right? And he needs lots and lots of energy to do work or to do that exercise. So his muscles are needing that energy. So they're going to break down more glucose to give him more energy. And in that state, while he's exercising and pushing that tire, he's going to exhale more CO2, which is coming down from the breakdown of glucose. Now you're going to say, but what does that mean? How does that play a role in homeostasis? Learners, you can see that we need to keep glucose constant. We'll also need to ensure that the CO2 that is released as a chemical cannot stay in the blood. It must be removed. Okay, so we're going to see exactly how it's going to be removed. Now we're going to look at the homeostasis of carbon dioxide, all right? So let's look at the levels of carbon dioxide in the blood. The levels of carbon dioxide in the blood, that's released from respiration, determines the rate and depth of breathing and the heartbeat. Okay, so what controls our heartbeat and breathing rate is the levels of CO2 or carbon dioxide in the blood. Where does the carbon dioxide come from? It comes from the breakdown of glucose. Right, so the levels of CO2 in the blood controls your heartbeat and your breathing rate. Now let us look at the sketch. First of all, something in the body must detect that there is a high level of CO2 in the blood. Now we have here in the neck, we have a blood vessel called the carotid artery. Here's the carotid artery in the neck. This carotid artery, learners, it has what we call chemoreceptors. Right, the receptor in the carotid artery is sensitive to the high levels of CO2 in the blood that came from the breakdown of glucose. Because the person's exercising, he's breaking down more glucose, he's releasing more CO2. So this high level of CO2, that is a stimulus. It's received by the chemoreceptors in the carotid artery. And then a nerve impulse is sent from the carotid artery to the back of the neck where there is the medulla oblongata that is below the brain. So the carotid artery has chemoreceptors sensitive to the high levels of CO2, which sends a nerve impulse to the medulla oblongata. Please remember these spellings are very important. The carotid artery, and then it sends a nerve impulse to the medulla oblongata, which you're going to learn in grade 12. Here's the spinal cord and there's the medulla oblongata. And then the medulla oblongata will send a nerve impulse, which is a message to the heart. And what is the heart going to do now? The heart is actually going to beat very, very fast. You can see the heart is going to beat very, very fast. The medulla oblongata also sends a message to, it sends it to the lungs, okay, to your diaphragm. Remember in gaseous exchange, we did the diaphragm and the intercostal muscles, which hold the ribs in place. The intercostal muscles, those are muscles. The diaphragm is a muscle. So the medulla oblongata sends a nerve impulse to the heart and the intercostal muscles and the diaphragm. Okay, and what does it do? It causes the breathing rate to increase. So the rate and the depth of breathing will increase. And what happens now? Because you are breathing very, very fast, you're going to exhale that CO2 even more. Right, so this is how carbon dioxide levels will be kept constant in the blood. It mustn't be high at all because carbon dioxide reacts with water in the blood to form an acid, and this can denature the enzymes controlling respiration. So remember here, learners, the carotid artery has chemoreceptors. It will send, which will detect the high levels of CO2 in the blood, and then you find that these chemoreceptors will send a nerve impulse to the medulla oblongata, and the medulla oblongata now will send a nerve impulse to the heart and to the breathing muscles, which is your diaphragm and your intercostal muscles, and your rate and depth of breathing is going to increase because your heart is going to pump more CO2 to the lungs, and there it's going to be exhaled, and the CO2 level comes back to normal. This comprises at least 7 marks in the exam. So it's done in grade 11 and it will be tested in grade 12 for sure. So you need to know what maintains the CO2 level to be low in the blood. This is called homeostasis, and the part of the brain that does it is called what? The medulla oblongata. What are the 2 breathing muscles sensitive to remove the CO2? Diaphragm and intercostal muscles. What are the 2 organs to which the medulla oblongata will send a nerve impulse to? Heart and the lungs. Okay, which part of the lungs has a nerve impulse go to? The intercostal muscles. What is the diaphragm and what is the intercostal muscles? They are breathing muscles involved in rapidly breathing, so you can remove that CO2 rapidly during exhalation. What is the name of the blood vessel? So you can have in the biological term, name or the type of blood vessel sensitive to high levels of CO2. It's going to be the carotid artery. Receptors in the carotid artery sensitive to high levels of CO2. What is the receptors? Chemoreceptors. So children, if you know that, you'll be able to know exactly how CO2 in the blood is kept constant. Now we can use a flow chart, and remember, in a flow diagram or a flow chart, we only use words and arrows. We do not use pictures or sketches. Right, so let's see. This is a flow diagram. Now, do not draw a flow diagram when they ask you to describe or to write a paragraph. You only do a flow diagram if the question asks or requests, draw a flow diagram. Then you're going to use words and arrows. But if they ask you to draw a flow diagram, it doesn't mean because of the word diagram, you have to start drawing the diagrams. You only use words and arrows. So let's see. What's the flow chart to keep CO2 very, very minimum in the blood? Carbon dioxide in the blood levels increase above normal levels. Why? The person is exercising. More glucose is broken down. So, therefore, when more glucose is broken down, the carbon dioxide levels in the blood will increase above normal. Then, the receptor cells in the carotid artery in the neck, we've seen that, is stimulated. So the high levels of CO2 will stimulate the carotid artery in the neck. Okay, to do what? Now, that carotid artery in the neck will send a nerve impulse to the medulla oblongata in the brain, right, which is just above the spinal cord. This medulla oblongata will be stimulated, and it sends an impulse to the breathing muscles, which is your intercostal muscles and your diaphragm and the heart. The three parts to which the medulla oblongata sends a nerve impulse is breathing muscles, which is your diaphragm, and your intercostal muscles and your heart. Okay? And what happens? The breathing muscles contract more actively. That means the rate and the depth of breathing will increase. You breathe at a faster rate. This increases the rate and depth of the breathing. Your heart will also beat very, very fast, so that more CO2 will be pumped by the heart to the lungs. So more CO2 is taken to the lungs to be exhaled. And then the CO2 levels in the blood will return to normal. So this is homeostasis regarding carbon dioxide. So here is a multiple choice activity whereby you need to know the answers are all there. How do we get to the right answer to get good marks? So the rate of breathing, that means how fast you breathe, is regulated, means controlled by the medulla oblongata. Mainly, the rate of breathing is regulated by the medulla oblongata, mainly under voluntary control. No, we cannot control it. We can't control our breathing muscles. So it's not voluntary. According to the oxygen level, no, the medulla oblongata does not react or respond to oxygen. According to the blood pressure, the medulla oblongata does not respond to blood pressure. But yes, the rate and depth of breathing is regulated or controlled by the medulla oblongata, mainly because of according to the carbon dioxide level in the blood. So that is the answer. That means carbon dioxide levels in the blood will increase, and then that medulla oblongata is going to be stimulated. Right. Let's go to the next activity. There's another multiple choice. The following will determine the rate of breathing in humans. Now, what determines how fast you breathe? Let's go to the previous question. This is the rate of breathing is regulated by the medulla oblongata, but according to what? According to the carbon dioxide levels in the blood. Now, how does this question differ? The following will determine the rate of breathing in the humans. Carbon dioxide in the blood. Can you see they ask it in different ways? So the rate of breathing is always controlled not by hemoglobin in the tissues. What is hemoglobin? It carries oxygen. It's not controlled by oxygen in the exhaled air. It's not controlled by bronchioles in the lung, but the rate and depth of breathing is determined by the carbon dioxide levels in the blood. Okay. Now, this question was taken from the November, last year's grade 12, November 2023, paper 1. Okay, it looks a bit complicating, learners, but you need to always analyze. Look at the picture and analyze. The 4 responses here are there. They are one of them will have or some of them will be incorrect, and only one needs to be corrected. So let's see. So they tell you, and always read the stem of the question because it gives you a clue on what is happening in that diagram. The diagram below represents the events that occur during the homeostatic control of blood glucose. So we need to control blood glucose. Which one of the following represents gland X and hormone Y? So let's see. Here it's saying that the level of glucose in the blood will decrease. So let's say, for example, the person was in this aeroplane and he fell in the snow and he couldn't get food for a long time, so he wasn't eating. So what's going to happen? The level of glucose in the blood will decrease. Now, when you have a low level of glucose in the blood, what is the homeostatic or negative feedback that's going to happen to bring about homeostasis, to ensure that the glucose is kept constant and not low or too high? So when the glucose level is low in the blood, gland X detects the change. What will be gland X? Which gland controls the glucose level? It is the islets of Langerhans in the pancreas. The pancreas is an organ, but the gland in the organ is the islets of Langerhans. So gland X is going to be the islets of Langerhans in the pancreas, will detect the change. What change? That the glucose level in the blood dropped. And then this pancreas or islets of Langerhans will send a nerve impulse now. It's going to cause the level of the hormone to increase. So gland X detects the change, that the glucose level is low in the blood. Glucose level in blood decreases. And then it's going to secrete another hormone. And what hormone will that be? If your glucose level is too low in the blood, then your islets of Langerhans in the pancreas is going to secrete glucagon. And the glucagon is going to convert the excess glucose, which was stored as glycogen. The glucagon is going to react with glycogen to release it as glucose. So the glucagon is going to react with what? Glycogen, and break the glycogen to glucose so that glucose can be made available in the blood. So let's see. Level of glucose in the blood drops or decreases. The gland X that detects the change is going to be the pancreas or the islets of Langerhans. And then the level of hormone Y will increase. What's the level of hormone Y? It's going to be glucagon, because glucagon is released when the glucose level is low. And then that's going to cause the level of blood glucose to increase. How did it do it? The glucagon converted the glycogen into glucose. Right, so remember, children, that glucagon is released when the glucose level in the blood is low. But when the glucose level in the blood is high, it's going to be insulin. Now, we already know that X is the pancreas. We already know that low glucose levels in the blood will always be glucagon. So we're looking for pancreas or islets of Langerhans, and we're looking for what? Glucagon. So straight away, we can see pancreas, we can see glucagon. That could be right. Let's go to the next one. Pituitary is definitely out. Pituitary is out. So now we have two options. We have option A, which is the pancreas, and option C, which is the pancreas. But we know that the pancreas releases glucagon when the sugar is low or the glucose is low. So it's going to be the pancreas, and it's going to release glucagon. It's not going to release insulin. That's incorrect. So the correct answer there would have been B. No, sorry, it's going to be A. Right? It's going to be A, pancreas and glucagon. So you have to analyze it. And you can see here's the answer, that it is the pancreas and glucagon. Now we go to more questions from the November 2023 paper. A person produces a smaller volume of urine. Now we're no more concentrating on glucose. We're not looking at carbon dioxide. We are looking now at urine. And what does urine contain? It contains water. Right. Now we want to see that the water balance in the blood must be kept constant. That means a person must not pass out too much of urine where he's losing the water in the urine, because he may be sweating and losing water through the sweat. So here, a person produces a smaller volume, means amount, of urine, probably because. Now children, remember what I said earlier, that your water balance must be kept constant in the blood. Now sometimes on a hot day, what happens? You perspire, you sweat. When you're sweating, what happens? Your water level in the blood, you have to say in the blood, will decrease. Okay, it drops. So on a hot day, you're sweating, water level in the blood drops, right? And if your water level in the blood drops, it means now we can't afford to lose more water in the urine. So this low water level in the blood, because it's hot, you're going to produce more ADH. Your kidney tubules are going to become more permeable to water. More water is going to be reabsorbed into the blood, and you're going to pass out a smaller volume of urine. So a person produces a smaller volume of urine. Why? Because the ADH levels are high and in the blood, and the renal tubules are more permeable to water. So more water can be reabsorbed. So let's see the options. We know that if you pass less volume in the urine, less water volume in the urine, less water in the urine, smaller volume, it means that your ADH levels are high. So ADH levels are high and ADH levels are high. That means your answer can only be between A and B, because if your volume of urine is low, it means you reabsorb more water. That means to reabsorb, you must have high levels of ADH, which can be A or B. Now, renal tubules are what? The kidney tubules. Okay, they must become permeable. Who makes the kidney tubules permeable, children? It is ADH. ADH makes the kidney tubules permeable to water. ADH. It makes the kidney tubules permeable to water, so more water is reabsorbed into the blood, and you'll have a concentrated or very little urine, right? So it's going to be ADH is high and the renal tubules are more permeable. They are definitely not less permeable. So B is out, and the correct answer would be A. Okay? And here's the correct answer, that the ADH levels are high in the blood and the renal tubules are more permeable to water. Now, we're going to look at this next question here. The list below contains some steps taken before and during the investigation. This question is coming from the June 2022 paper, which is the NATED paper, right? The papers whereby matrics write in June as well. So here it is. Always read it in full. Take a highlighter and read. The list below contains some steps taken before and during the investigation. Steps taken before and during an investigation. A scientist did an investigation on a healthy individual. That means he had no health problems. And they wanted to determine the effect of drinking water on urine production. They wanted to see what? The effect of how much water you drank and how much was the urine output. So, what is my independent variable here? You are learning investigative questions. You need to know them and practice them from now, because they will be asked in grade 12. And children, for every investigation, there will always be a scientist did an investigation on whatever to determine the effect. Okay, to determine the effect. So to determine the effect of drinking water, that first part, to determine the effect of drinking water is your independent variable. That's what you can control. You can control how much of water you're going to give an individual. But you cannot control how much of urine he's going to be producing. So urine production becomes my dependent variable. And what else? And the effect of drinking water becomes my independent variable. So the volume of water drank compared to the urine output, that's independent and dependent. Now, the participant was requested not to eat or drink for 4 hours before the investigation. Why? They didn't want the water to be already there. They wanted that to know that whatever we get as a result, it must be from the investigation itself. We don't want false results. So therefore, they made sure that the learner or the participant did not eat or drink for 4 hours. Okay? The investigation was conducted over a period of 3 days. 3 days they conducted the investigation. The procedure was as follows. On day 1, the participant was given 600 ml of water to drink. So they gave them at least a little bit more than 2 glasses of water. Remember, 1 glass is 250 ml. 2 glasses is 500 ml. So a little bit more than 2 glasses of water to drink. That was day 1 to that participant. On day 2, the same person who participated in the survey drank 800 ml of water, almost close to a liter. On day 3, he was given a whole liter of water, which is 1,000 milliliters of water. So there were participants, and this participant, that means only one person took part in the survey, which means, learners, that this investigation is not reliable. Why isn't it a reliable investigation? Because they only used one person in this investigation. Instead of using many, they used only one. So that person, day 1, he gave 600 ml to drink, then 800 ml to drink. Third day, they gave him 1,000 ml, which is almost a liter to drink of water. Now, for each day, the amount of urine produced by the participant was measured and recorded over the next few hours, and an average was calculated. So the list below shows or contains some steps taken before and during the investigation. Now, what are these steps? Which of the steps above or below here can be considered as part of the planning steps before conducting the investigation? What are the steps that you must plan during an investigation? Now, let us see the steps. Because the question is, there's the question. Which of the steps, actually it's supposed to come on top, which of the steps above can be considered as part of the planning steps? For every investigation, you must have a planning step. So let's see the steps. Determine the sample size of your participant. Yes, you need to know how many participants am I going to use for this investigation. So that is to determine the sample size of the participants, which is correct. You also need to know the time and duration of the investigation. What time I'm going to do this investigation? Must I do it at night and then see his urine output? Must I do that in the morning? Must I do it for 1 hour? Must I do it for 2 hours? So you're going to determine the time and the date and the duration. The time, the date, and the duration of the investigation. That is what you must plan. Which day am I going to do it? Can I do it on a Friday when people are very busy? I better do it on a Wednesday. Maybe they are more relaxed. It's midweek. What time can I do it? Can I do it in the afternoon? No, people would have been going home. Can I do it in the morning? Yes, I think it's better. So you must also plan what time are you going to be doing it, what day you're going to be doing it, and for how long you're going to be doing it. But that is planning the time and date and duration. That's one point. You must plan how many people are you going to be using in your investigation. That means you must determine the sample size of your participants. Right. But now in this investigation where you wanted to know, I'm giving these participants water. How much urine will they produce? Can one of your planning steps be determine the urine output? No. You can't predict what the urine output is, and it's definitely not a planning step. So those two are planning steps, but not to determine the urine output. Determine how much water one can drink. No, that's incorrect. That's not part of the investigation. We want to know how much of urine will he be producing if he drank different amounts of water. So determine how much water one can drink is not part of a planning step. So the two planning steps are determine the sample size of your participants. How many people do you want to take part? And two, when is the time that you're going to do the investigation? Now, these two planning steps is universal. It will go with any investigation. And you can see the answer there is 1 and 2, where you must determine the sample size of the participants, and you must also determine the time of your investigation. Now, this one here, learners, is also an investigation. Remember that these investigations are very difficult. So the more you practice it in grade 11, the better understanding you'll have in grade 12. Practice makes perfect. So let us see. This one, scientists investigated the effect of wearing face masks on the carbon dioxide levels in the blood. So let's say now they wanted to find out, if I'm wearing a carbon dioxide, if I'm wearing a mask, does it affect the amount of CO2 I release? Will the CO2 become less? Will it become more? So they wanted to investigate the effect that wearing face masks have on the carbon dioxide output. So they obtained permission from 150 healthy individuals or volunteers. So they got permission. Can you see it's a planning step? They got permission from how many? 150 volunteers, which means it's a big sample size. They never just use one. So it's a big sample size, a large sample size, and therefore it becomes a reliable investigation. They obtained permission from 150 volunteers, and then all of them were aged 30 to participate. They applied a sensor to the participant's skin to measure the carbon dioxide levels in the blood. So they took a device to measure the CO2 levels in the blood, right? Because they want to see whether you wear a mask, what is the effect on CO2 production. Then they asked the participants to sit still for 10 minutes without wearing a face mask. They wanted to know if they sit still and they are calm, then obviously now the rate of respiration will also decrease. So they wanted to start off with no other influences. They wanted it to be calm, and then they wanted to start the investigation. So they sat still without wearing a face mask. Then they sat still for 10 minutes while wearing a face mask. So first one, they did not wear a face mask. And the second one, they wore a face mask, and then they measured the carbon dioxide level. So exercise for 10 minutes while wearing a face mask, and then they had a 15 minutes interval between each phase. Then they recorded the carbon dioxide levels at the end of the 10-minute phase. So let's see. They also ensured that the face mask covered the nose and the mouth. Now, so far, children, you can see that this investigation is reliable. Give one reason for your answer. They used a large sample size of 150 volunteer men. Right. Identify. Now we're going to identify what is going to be my independent variable. And what is independent? Look again. The effect of wearing the face mask on carbon dioxide level. What are you controlling? You can control that these participants must wear a mask and these ones must not wear a mask. But what you can't control, what you can't measure on your own or predict, is how much of CO2 is released. So the amount of CO2 released becomes my dependent variable, and the wearing or not wearing of a mask becomes my independent variable. You're going to say the wearing or not wearing of a mask, or the wearing of a mask becomes my independent variable. By saying wearing of a mask, it means either you wear it or you don't, and that was your independent variable. Right, so let us now, and then they recorded the carbon dioxide levels at the end of, after every 10 minutes, they recorded, means the intervals between each phase was 10 minutes, so it was kept the same. That is called validity, where you keep the intervals between the exercise the same, okay? After how many minutes are you going to measure the CO2? After every 10 minutes. Now that is called validity. So let's see, what's your independent variable? The wearing of a face mask. What's your dependent variable? Your carbon dioxide levels in the blood. Where can you get your independent and your dependent variable? You will get it from the aim. What is the aim? To investigate the effect of wearing face masks on the carbon dioxide levels in the blood. Okay, that's your aim. Same question, same investigation, different questions. Give a reason why the carbon dioxide levels were measured while the participants were sitting still. That's because they wanted to see, is it the exercise that's producing the CO2? Is it the mask that's producing the CO2? Is it the level of activity that's causing the CO2 to increase? Or is it the wearing of a mask? Okay, so give a reason why the CO2 levels were measured while the participants were sitting still. Because that acts as a control. They said, let us give this group to sit still. They must not wear a mask. And let's see if the CO2 level is going to be high or low. So that group which was not treated with a mask is called your control group. Okay. And why must you have a control group? To see if it's the face mask that affects the carbon dioxide levels and not the physical activity. So what is it causing that's causing the CO2 levels to rise? Is it the face mask or how active the person is? No, this group here didn't have a face mask. Look at how low the levels of CO2 is. This group had a face mask. You can see the CO2 levels are high, which means that it is the mask that's put on the mouth and all that CO2 is accumulating. Instead of being released, it's accumulating on the skin surface. Right. Now, look at again. Again, it's the same investigation, a different question. Describe the homeostatic control of carbon dioxide when it is high in the blood. You can see, learners, it's a total of 7 marks. A small little question like this carries 7 marks. And how much marks do you need to pass the paper? 45. So out of 45, 7 is on one small tiny little question. And you have to swat this off. You have to learn it and understand it. Right. So receptors, so how do you keep the carbon dioxide low in the blood? The receptors in the carotid artery are stimulated. You must use that word stimulated. And to get the full marks, you have to say the whole sentence properly. You have to say receptors in the carotid artery are stimulated. You cannot say that the carotid artery is stimulated. It's going to be wrong. It is the receptors in the carotid artery is stimulated and impulses are sent to the medulla oblongata. The medulla oblongata stimulates the heart to beat faster. 1 mark for heart, 1 mark for beating faster. You cannot say that the medulla oblongata will cause the heart to beat. The heart is always beating. Or you cannot say the medulla oblongata will cause the heart to beat fast. Fast? No. It must be faster, because now you are getting more CO2. So it can't just beat fast, it must beat even faster. So you have to use word faster. The breathing muscles, or you could say intercostal muscles and diaphragm, they contract more actively, or you could say the breathing muscles and the intercostal muscles will contract and relax at a higher rate, right? Contract more actively. Then the rate and the depth of breathing will increase. Okay. More carbon dioxide is taken to the lungs and exhaled. And the carbon dioxide, you have to indicate this, you have to say this at the end, children. It can be a compulsory mark. And then the carbon dioxide level in the blood decreases because you're exhaling more CO2 fast and returns to normal. Okay. Now here is another homeostatic question regarding glucose. And this differs from the one that we did a bit earlier. That one was on a flow chart. Now here is also a flow chart, but let's see. That one was, remember, on a low glucose level. Now we're speaking about high glucose levels. See, when there is high blood glucose levels, that means the glucose level in the blood is high. What's going to happen? It's going to send a nerve impulse to gland A. What is the key word? If we're talking about glucose, the gland can only be the pancreas, which is the organ, or you can say the islets of Langerhans. Let me write it here properly. You're going to say, what is the gland that is stimulated when your glucose level is high? High levels of glucose. Here, you're going to say pancreas. That's the gland. Or you could say it is the islets or islets of Langerhans. So high levels of glucose in the blood stimulates the pancreas or the islets of Langerhans. And what do we know? Which hormone must be triggered when the glucose level is high in the blood? We did it earlier in the year. It's going to be what? Hormone called insulin. Because high levels of glucose in the blood is associated with insulin. Low levels of glucose in the blood is associated with glucagon. And then you ask yourself, children, if the glucose level is high in the blood, it's going to stimulate the islets of Langerhans in the pancreas, which is released by the beta cells to secrete the hormone insulin. Remember, gland A is a pancreas. It's an endocrine gland. Why endocrine? It releases hormones. And what else? Hormones go directly into the blood and not through a duct. So this pancreas secretes insulin directly into the blood because insulin is a hormone. That hormone is going to go into the blood and it's going to go to the liver. Now at the liver, that's where there was excess glucose. So whatever you ate, all the sweets and chocolates and crisp and bread and pap, all that carbohydrates was broken down to glucose. All that absorbed glucose went by the hepatic portal vein to the liver. And body cells, which body cells? It is basically your muscles. So all that excess glucose went to your body cells and your liver. And then insulin is going to go to the liver and your muscle cells. And what is it going to do? It's going to convert the excess glucose into glycogen and store it. And the glucose level is going to come back to normal. So let's see. High blood glucose goes to the pancreas. It secretes insulin. Insulin will go to the liver and convert all the excess glucose into glycogen and store it. Because glycogen is not soluble. It is a polysaccharide. It is insoluble in water. So it's a very good form in which it can be stored. Glucose is soluble because it's a monosaccharide. That's why it's going to be used up. So high levels of glucose must be stored away as glycogen. It can't be stored as glucose because it's going to be used by the body. And then it's going to be excreted. If it can't be used, it's going to be excreted in the urine and you're going to suffer from diabetes mellitus. Okay, So that is one thing. High glucose levels, pancreas, insulin. Insulin goes to the liver, converts your glucose, excess glucose, into glycogen. Now let's look at this one. Low blood glucose levels in the blood, or low glucose levels in the blood. Low glucose levels in the blood, or low blood glucose levels. When your glucose level is high, you were traveling the plane, you landed in the snow, there's no food, you didn't have no food in your suitcases, there's no food, there's no trees, nothing. So your glucose level in the blood drops for a few days. Now, how did you survive? How did you get energy? That low blood glucose levels in the blood, it's going to stimulate the pancreas to secrete hormone C, which is going to be what? Glucagon. And the glucagon is a hormone. It's going to go directly by the bloodstream to your liver and your muscle cells and tell them, liver and muscles, you have stored excess glucose in the form of glycogen. Now this person's blood glucose is low. Please break down your glycogen and make it available as glucose, and then the glucose level is going to rise as normal. So let's see. A certain disorder caused the decrease in production of hormone B. What is hormone B? Insulin. So what is the disorder that's going to cause less insulin? It's going to be what? Diabetes mellitus. Here it's going to be what? Diabetes mellitus. And what is diabetes mellitus? It is the disease caused when the glucose level is very high and cannot be converted into glycogen and stored because there is a deficiency of insulin. So when there's a deficiency of insulin, the high glucose levels cannot be converted into glycogen and stored in your liver and muscles. Right. So here's it. Explain how this will affect the blood glucose level. If there's not enough insulin, the blood glucose levels will remain high. This is a very, very important. See? So when you don't have enough insulin, the blood glucose will remain high because the cells will not be able to absorb glucose from the blood. The liver cannot convert excess glucose to glycogen. You see, it can't convert it and store it, so the glucose level is going to be high. And you suffer from diabetes mellitus. Name the disorder, diabetes mellitus. What's diabetes mellitus again, learners? My glucose level is high. I'm unable to convert my excess glucose into glycogen and store it. So if I can't do that, I suffer from diabetes mellitus. Now, these are revision questions from November 2017, paper 1. So, study the flow diagram before. Now, this diagram got pictures and little notes, and it will help you to understand the previous question even better. That here's my liver as an organ. Here's my pancreas, which looks like a leaf. You know that the pancreas secretes 2 hormones. Right, let's just look at this here now. Identify organ 1, it's the pancreas. Identify hormone 2, let's look at hormone 2. Now children, here you can see that hormone 1, right, or organ 1 there, hormone 2 is a dotted line. And whatever hormone 2 does, you connect it with a dotted line here. So hormone 2 is a dotted line, and what does it do? Here's the blood glucose. It will decrease the blood glucose level. So hormone 2 is dotted, and this is dotted, and it's decreasing the blood glucose level, which means hormone 2 decreases the blood glucose level. So hormone 2 can only be insulin, because it decreases the blood glucose level by converting excess glucose to glycogen. Now let's look at the solid line. Solid line is hormone 3. And what does hormone 3 do? Let's look at the solid line here. Hormone 3, we know, is something that will increase the blood glucose level. It's going to be glucagon. So what's hormone 3? The same solid line there and there. Hormone 3 is glucagon. Why? because hormone 3 is going to increase the blood glucose level, and that is glucagon. It's going to convert the excess or stored glycogen into glucose. The disorder caused when organ 1, what is organ 1? The pancreas fails to release sufficient amounts of hormone 2. That means, what is the disease called when organ 1, which is the pancreas, fails to release enough insulin? It's called the diabetes mellitus. So this is a way to show you same content, learners, can be asked in different ways, with a picture, with a table, in a multiple choice, in a diagram. So same content asked differently, but the content will always be the same. What is the mechanism that controls the level of glucose in the body? Now you know, if there's going to be high levels of glucose, what's going to be released? Insulin. What does the insulin do? It takes the excess glucose, which is high, and converts it into glycogen. And where is it going to be stored? In your liver and in your muscles, right? Now, what is the mechanism called? Okay, children, let's see. What is this mechanism called whereby we're going to control the levels of glucose in the body? It's called a negative feedback mechanism. Now, we are now looking at another question that got to do with salt. And let's read the questions now. It's saying, the diagram below shows the reabsorption of salt and water through the tubules of a nephron in the kidney under 3 different conditions. So, learners, these are now diagram 1, 2, and 3. Okay? And let us see now what is different about each diagram. You have to analyze your diagrams before answering the question. You cannot just answer the question without understanding what is the diagram showing me. So now there's a key here. This solid black arrow is indicating salt. This light gray arrow is indicating water. Now let us see. This little round thing, this is actually your kidney tubule. And what is that? This unshaded arrow is the flow of filtrate. What is filtered from the kidney nephrons to come into the tubule? It's called the filtrate. Just like you'll make tea with tea leaves, and then you will put a sieve, and then all your tea bags or tea leaves stay behind on the sieve, and then your tea gets filtered out. Now the tea that's filtered, it's called your filtrate. So what's in the cup that you need to drink is your filtrate. But what remains behind in your strainer, that is your residue. That's your tea leaves and all your tea leaves, and your tea bags and everything. So that's going to be in your strainer. That's a residue. But what comes out into your cup is called the filtrate. So now in your kidney you have a nephron. Do you remember? And in the nephron there was ultrafiltration. So what's going to happen there? From your blood, your water, your dissolved salts, your glucose is all going to filter through and form part of the filtrate. So we call it the glomerular filtrate. And it has salt and water. Already salt and water that was absorbed from your intestine is in that filtrate. It's now by the kidney. Now, what is happening to the salt? A lot of salt and a lot of water is reabsorbed from the filtrate. Then the rest of the filtrate is going to go to the renal tubules and to the bladder and out of the body. Okay? Now remember, you absorb a lot of salt and a lot of water. Now let's look at the second one. You'll say, hi, but the first one and the second one looks the same. But look at the width of the arrows. What is it telling you? Now you read here. The diagram below shows the reabsorption of salt and water. What you know about salt? It's aldosterone. What you know about water? It's ADH. Salt and water to the tubules of a nephron in the kidney under 3 different conditions. Now there are 3 different conditions, and in these 3 different conditions we're going to look at the reabsorption of salt and water. Okay. The width of the arrows, how thick the arrows are, represents the amount of salt and water. Let's look at it. In diagram 1, the salt looks more, right, because salt is going to be dark or black, and then the water is going to also be the same amount that's going to be reabsorbed. Let's look at diagram 2. It's the same filtrate that's coming from the nephron going to the kidney tubules. The filtrate, then you can see that this arrow also looks a little bit more is reabsorbed, and this light gray arrow looks smaller, so there's going to be less water. So glomerular filtrate with salt and water, you're going to see that more salt is going to be reabsorbed here and less water. All right, and then you're going to look at diagram 3, glomerular filtrate with salt and water. Here's your filtrate coming with salt and water, and now you're going to see more salt was absorbed than water. More salt was absorbed than water, and then the rest went to the bladder and the kidney tube to the bladder. Now, name the hormone in the human body that's responsible for controlling the water content. What controls the water content in the blood? It's going to be ADH. So name the hormone in the body that's responsible for controlling the water balance, and that's ADH. It's produced by the pituitary. How does it do it? We need more water in the blood, less ADH. Kidney tubules become less permeable to water, and more water is excreted in the urine. Okay? And then, what is the name of the hormone in the human body that is responsible for controlling the salt balance in the blood? Now, if you have too much of salt, what's the hormone? It's called aldosterone. And which diagram, 1, 2, or 3? 1, 2, or 3 would represent a person who had eaten salty chips on a hot day without any intake of water. So imagine now you're eating salt and vinegar crisp, or you bought some chips and you put salt. Now salt is high in the blood because you added salt to your food. Plus it's hot and you are sweating. Now your water level is going to be low in the blood. So which diagram, 1, 2, or 3, would represent a person who had eaten salty chips? If he's eating salty food or salty chips, less salt is going to be reabsorbed in his blood because he's already eating something salty. So he can't absorb even more salt. So when he's eating something salty, more salt will be reabsorbed in the blood, and for salt we had an arrow. So the answer is going to be glomerular filtrate with salt and water, and you can see here more salt is absorbed. Now here there's less salt, and here also there's equal amounts of salt in water. So which diagram, 1, 2, or 3 would actually represent a person who's eating salty chips? Who's eating more salty chips? Now we're going to see. If you're eating more salt, you'll excrete more salt in your urine. If you're having more salt, if you're having less salt, you'll reabsorb more salt. So let's see. Here, more salt and more water was reabsorbed. Here it was less. In this diagram, there was more salt that was reabsorbed and less water was reabsorbed. Can you see that, children? So which diagram would represent eating salty chips? If more salt is going to be passing to the bladder, it means diagram 3 is the one. Diagram 3 would represent a person who had eaten salty chips. Why? If he's eating salty chips, he's got salt in his blood, he needs to excrete more salt in the urine. And you can see that last diagram 3, more salt is excreted in the urine because it contains more salt, because he had a salty meal. All right, and you can see the salt balance is high, the arrow is thick, and here you can see that more water was reabsorbed into the blood. Right, the diagram below shows the reabsorption of salt and water through the tubules of a nephron in the kidney under different conditions. The width of the arrow represents the amount of salt and water. So let's see how much of salt and water is absorbed. Same diagram. How thick your arrow is means more of that is reabsorbed. If it's thin, less of that is reabsorbed. Okay. or it can go into the kidney, into the bladder. The diagram below shows the reabsorption of salt and water through the tubules of a nephron in the kidney under 3 different conditions. The width of the arrows represents the amount of salt and water. How wide is the arrows? How thick and how wide? It will represent the amounts of salt. So let's see. Explain your answer to question 5.3. What is 5.3's question? The question is, which diagram, 1, 2, or 3, would represent a person who had eaten salty chips? Now, if you ate salty chips, you need to excrete more salt in the urine. This one is less salt. This one is less salt. This one is more salt, okay? That is aldosterone. Then, which diagram, 1, 2, or 3, would represent a person who had eaten salty chips on a hot day? 3, and he's also having no intake of water. All right, so children, here now, what are the revision questions here? The diagram below shows the reabsorption of salt and water through the tubules. Again, the same picture, but now different questions, okay? They want to know, why did we say that? Let us look at it. Okay, children, let's look at this one here. Let's go to the previous one. They want to know, why did we say that diagram 3 represents a person who ate a lot of salt? How do we know that? Let's see. We know that because we said that the thickness of the arrow will indicate which one is taking more of the substance to the bladder. And you can see in diagram 3, if the person ate a lot of salt, they're going to excrete more salt and absorb less salt. So this one, diagram 3, is showing you that there's more salt that's going to be excreted. That's why this is going to be diagram 3 of the person eating a salty meal. So we know that there's more salt that's going to be excreted because the salt balance was high. And how will you explain it? You'll explain it like this, by saying, the blood will have a high salt content, or you can say the salt level in the blood is higher than normal because the person ate chips with salt or salty chips. Therefore, no aldosterone will be released. If he's already got a lot of salt in the blood, there's no need to reabsorb more salt. There's a need to excrete more salt to the bladder. So the blood will have high salt, therefore no aldosterone will be released, resulting in less salt being reabsorbed into the blood, and then more salt will be excreted in the urine. The blood will have less water. Why less water? Because remember they said also, let us look at this. See, he ate salty chips, but without taking water. So he had salt, a lot of salt, but because he never drank water, even his water balance was low. So you have to include it in your answer, that the blood will have a high salt, therefore less aldosterone will be released. Therefore less salt will be reabsorbed because he's having a lot of salt. Ne? The blood will have less water than normal. Why? Because he didn't drink enough water. More ADH will be secreted, making the kidney tubules more permeable to water. More water will leave the kidney tubules, resulting in more water being reabsorbed into the blood. So remember now, we're going to say when the water level in the blood is high, then the pituitary gland is going to secrete less ADH. Water level in the blood is high, less ADH. Kidney tubules are not permeable to water. More water will be excreted in the urine, and then the water level will go back to normal. If your water level is going to be low in the blood, when the water level is low in the blood because he didn't drink water, he's sweating, he's dehydrating. If the water level is low in the blood, there's going to be more ADH. the kidney tubules become more permeable to water, and more water will be reabsorbed into the blood, and less water will be passed into the urine, because he's already drinking less water. He can't afford to pass out more water in the urine. Right. Here is now the kidney tubules and the brain, or the human brain. And let us see, the diagram below represents a homeostatic mechanism in the human body when water levels are low. So what is this whole thing here? To keep things constant. It is called a mechanism called the negative feedback. Now, let's see. Osmoreceptors in the brain. What is an osmoreceptor? It is a part of the brain that detects the water balance in the blood. Where will I find osmoreceptors? I'll find it in the hypothalamus. Why hypothalamus? The hypothalamus controls your water balance. So, when your water balance is too high in the blood or too low in the blood, the osmoreceptors in the hypothalamus will be stimulated, and then it will stimulate the pituitary to secrete more or less ADH. So let's see here. What is this gland X or Z? That is the pituitary gland. Osmoreceptors in the brain. Osmoreceptors, receptors that control the water balance, right, are going to stimulate the pituitary in the brain. There's it. It's gland X. Then gland X is going to release hormone Y, which is going to be what? ADH. Because whenever we talk about water being low or high, there's osmoreceptors in the hypothalamus, and they're going to detect that the water level is going to be low in the blood. That's in our question. It's going to send the hormone ADH to the bloodstream to go to the kidney tubules. We also call it renal tubules. And then what's going to happen? More water is going to be reabsorbed into the blood, né? And there's urine is going to be low. Less urine will be excreted. Identify hormone Y, because you're dealing with osmoreceptors and water, that is ADH. Identify structure X. Structure X is what? Structure X in the kidney, that's your kidney tubules, or you can call it the nephron, but you also say kidney tubules. You can also say renal tubules. Anything that got to do with the kidney is called renal. State whether the volume of urine produced will increase or decrease for this individual. Always the opposite. If the water levels are low in the blood, water levels are low in the blood, so the production of urine is going to be low. Low water levels in the blood, the volume of urine is going to be low because more water is reabsorbed. State whether the volume of urine will increase or decrease. It's going to decrease. So children, please understand this. When the water level in the blood is low, when the water level in the blood is low, there's going to be more reabsorption of water. When your water level in the blood is low, more water will leave the kidney tubules to go into the blood. So more water is going to be reabsorbed from the kidney tubules into the blood. How does it do it? More ADH will be released, and it's going to make the kidney tubules more permeable, so more water gets reabsorbed. So less water in the urine, more water was reabsorbed. More water in the urine means less water was reabsorbed. Again, more water in the urine means less water was reabsorbed into the blood, and less ADH. So less ADH, more water is in the urine, and less was reabsorbed. If the ADH level is high in the blood, then more water will be reabsorbed and less water will be in the urine Do you all understand this homeostatic mechanism, learners? I'm just going to revise that one more time because this is very, very important. Okay, let's look at it again because this is often tested in grade 12 about osmoregulation and ADH. Remember, osmoreceptors are those receptors in the hypothalamus that detect your water balance. So you're going to ask yourself, if my volume of urine is high, it means it is dilute. It means my urine got a lot of water. What does it mean? It means that there's less water was reabsorbed into my blood. Why? Why will you afford to pass more water into your urine? Because the water level in your blood was high. So the water level in your blood was high. High water levels in the blood will cause more water to be excreted in the urine because less water was reabsorbed. And why was less water reabsorbed? Less ADH was secreted. Okay? Do you understand that one? And then, if the volume of urine is going to be low, it means you have a concentrated urine. If you're going to have now a concentrated urine, that means your urine is very, very yellow. It's yellow, dark yellow, because it's concentrated. That means there's less urine. That means there's less water. It's concentrated. Why is there less water in your urine? Because the water level in your blood was low, so more water got reabsorbed into the blood. That's why there's less water in the urine, because more water was reabsorbed. And how did more water get reabsorbed? More ADH was released by the pituitary gland. Okay, so you need to know that. The diagram below represents one part of the negative feedback response that occurs when a person is dehydrated. Now, if you're dehydrated, it means you are sweating a lot and you're not drinking enough water. So there are decrease in the blood volume. That means water is less in your blood as a result of excessive loss of water, which is detected by the brain. Which part of the brain detects a low water balance in the blood? It is the hypothalamus. Okay, you're going to learn of that in grade 12. But anyway, children, here is the brain. And in the brain now, there's a center called the hypothalamus, okay? That one is going to stimulate the pituitary gland. Okay, leave the hypothalamus out. Just know for now that when the water levels are low in the blood, that your pituitary gland in the brain will secrete hormone ADH. ADH always got to do with water. Hormone ADH, it's going to go to the target organ. What is the target organ? The kidney tubules. And what is it going to respond and do? The kidney tubules are going to become more permeable to water due to ADH, and more water is going to be reabsorbed. That is the response. So, the diagram represents a part of the negative feedback. Look at how the same content is tested in different ways in a question. Same content. The content will always be the same. And what is that content? That controlling water balance, my hormone is ADH. What does ADH do? It makes my kidney tubules permeable to water. What does permeable mean? It allows water to leave it. To go where? Back into the blood. Who makes the kidney tubules permeable? ADH. What happens if there's no ADH? The kidney tubules are impermeable. No water can ever leave it. The kidney tubules only become permeable to water under the instruction of hormone ADH. So, the kidney tubules must be always impermeable so water comes out into the bladder in the urine, right? Through the bladder into your urine. So now, if you don't want too much of water to go in the urine, your kidney tubules must become permeable by ADH and more water is reabsorbed. That will be the response. So identify the hormone X. It's going to be ADH. What is the target organ of ADH? Your kidney tubules or your nephrons in the kidney. Describe the negative feedback response that occurs when a person is dehydrated, means less water in the blood. You're vomiting, you are having diarrhea. Right, so if you ate something and you're vomiting and you're sick, you had food poisoning and you're vomiting and you're having diarrhea, you are losing water through the feces. The water in the blood is going to drop. The blood is going to become thick. So you heard children of food poisoning. The little children ate those crisps and it caused food poisoning. They were vomiting and then they died. 6 children died. Why? How did they die? They didn't die of the poison. They died of dehydration. Because what did the poison do? The poison caused vomiting and diarrhea, and the child lost so much water through the feces and the vomiting. The water level in the blood dropped. The blood became very thick. The heart could not pump the blood that was too thick to all the cells. The cells did not get oxygen and glucose very fast. There was not enough cellular respiration to produce energy, and therefore the organs of the child failed to work because there was no ATP energy, because no oxygen and glucose could come fast to the organs, and therefore the organs failed to work. The heart failed to work, the kidney failed to work, the brain failed to work, because no oxygen and glucose was coming to the cells of the brain, the heart, and the kidney. It caused organ failure. Why? The blood was thick. Why was the blood thick? The child was dehydrated. Why was he dehydrated? He was vomiting and having diarrhea. Even if he drank water, even the water was coming out. So he died because of the loss of water in the blood, dehydration. So they needed to give him more ADH, and then the ADH will reabsorb most of the water, right? But even if it absorbed water, it was not enough and the blood became too thick. So sometimes they could give them a shot of ADH or an injection and make the kidney tubules permeable to reabsorb every bit of water in the body, and then maybe, if possible, the child can get a little better with antibiotics, and then the water can get reabsorbed, and then the cells can get hydrated. Not dehydrated, hydrated, and then the blood can become thinner and start flowing and taking your glucose and oxygen to the cells. So describe the negative response that occurs when a person is dehydrated after it has been detected by the brain. Remember, if you are dehydrated, what's going to happen? Your water level is low in the blood. An increase in ADH, it is going to cause an increase in ADH, will cause the walls of the kidney tubules to become permeable. More water will be reabsorbed. The blood volume will increase, more blood pressure. Less urine will be produced. There will be urine, but the volume will be less, and it's going to be concentrated. There, the urine will be concentrated, okay? And that is the end of the homeostasis regarding for this year: carbon dioxide, what else? Water, right, learners, and salt. Those are the 3 things that you did this year that you will need to know for next year. And always have what we call a concept mapping, whereby when you put about CO2, then you put medulla oblongata, you put carotid artery, you put breathing muscles, you put heartbeat, you put lungs, increase in rate and depth of breathing. So this is the mind map. So you need to know, how do I maintain CO2 levels in the blood? Oh, when a person is exercising, more glucose is broken down, more CO2 is released. High levels of CO2 stimulate the medulla oblongata, which controls your breathing rate, your heartbeat. More CO2 is pumped to the lungs, more is exhaled, CO2 comes back to normal. Then you'd make a little mind map regarding water. Then you put here, water is what? The pituitary gland. Okay, and then what does it secrete? ADH. And then what is the target organ? Kidney tubules. And then you talk about permeability. You see, so then you talk about low. If the water balance is low in the blood, more more ADH. If the water balance is high in the blood, less ADH. ADH makes things permeable. More permeable, more water reabsorbed. Less permeable, less water reabsorbed. Less water reabsorbed into the blood, more water in the urine. And then you talk about salt. You ring salt and you say, what is the salt? Salt is controlled by the hormone called aldosterone. Okay, you learn about salt, and then you're going to say that the salt is also controlled by your kidney tubules. Do you remember the salt? That when you have too much of salt, you're going to have too much of salt in the blood, less aldosterone. Less salt will be reabsorbed. And if you're going to have, so more salt in the blood, there's going to be less aldosterone. If you have less salt in your blood, right? If you have less salt in your blood, what's going to happen? If you're going to have less salt in your blood, you're going to have more salt reabsorbed, and there's going to be more aldosterone. So this is how we control the salt balance. It's controlled by aldosterone and is reabsorbed also from the kidney tubules. So that is it today, children, for homeostasis in grade 11. These are important questions. They come out as investigative questions. And next week, we'll be looking at questions on biodiversity in plants and animals and the phylogenetic trees that are involved in biodiversity. These are tricky questions, and if you want to get a distinction because you need to apply to the university, then you need to keep in touch with these pocket school lessons, listen to them and study well and make notes using concept mapping, mind mapping for you to do well. Thank you.